Selfishly speaking, wrote Henry James, there are too many people in Westminster Abbey. You feel yourself at times in danger of thinking meanly of the human personality. Numerosity, as it were, swallows up quality, and the perpetual sense of other elbows and knees begets a yearning for the desert. And that was in 1870. A Yorkshire businessman lost his wife, and she'd been a pious woman, and so when he went to the stonemason, he said, I'd like you to put on her gravestone, sacred to the memory of Doris Butterfield, she was thine. And the stonemason said, well, it's a very nice sentiment, yes, I can do that, it's very straightforward. If you come up to the cemetery next week, I'll have it in place. So he goes up the following week, and the stonemason's there. He says, I've done it, it looks very nice. Oh, yes. And it read, sacred to the memory of Doris Butterfield, she was thin. He said, hey, no, you've missed the E out. He said, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I do apologise. I don't know how I came to do that. Anyway, no harm done. I'll soon put it right. If you come up next week and I'll put the E back. So he goes up the following week, and the stone's there. And it now reads, sacred to the memory of Doris Butterfield, she was thin. I suppose it's all these tombs that's made me think of that.
Let's come a little bit closer. A very good afternoon to you, and a very warm welcome to Westminster Abbey this afternoon. Let me introduce myself. I'm one of the team of vergers here, and once our task here is to take you, our visitors and guests, around the Abbey on what they call known as super tours, and show you the
Most of the tombs had railings or grills to protect them from the prying fingers of pilgrims and sightseers. And in some tombs, like this of Eleanor of Castile in 1290, the original railings still survive. But most were taken away by that excellent sculptor but foolish man Francis Chantry in 1822. About as futile and misguided a decision as Lord Beaverbrook's when he was Minister of Aircraft Production and had everybody's garden railings taken away in 1940. It's the kind of unthinking official vandalism that happens every day, not just in 1822. Inscribed over the portals of every English institution ought to be the words of the 17th century Viscount Falkland. If it's not necessary to change, it's necessary not to change. The Abbey is a bewildering place. Chapels above chapels and chapels beyond that, all cluttered with tombs and monuments. It's like something out of Piranesi or the architecture of dreams. And as one goes over a little bridge and up steps into a succession of small rooms, it feels as it did when one was a child, being taken through the grotto to meet Santa Claus.
Kings and queens of England have all been crowned in a church on this site. That's quite some record, isn't it? The earlier kings of England, they used to be crowned in Winchester Cathedral. Mind you, William just to play it safe, he was crowned both in Westminster Abbey and in Winchester Cathedral. He wasn't going to take any chances here now, was he?
The concerns that govern human behaviour in life do not grow less petty or more noble in death. And did one want a single guiding principle about burial in the Abbey throughout its history, it would be, whom would you like to be seen dead with? For centuries, the centre of gravity in the Abbey was the shrine of Edward the Confessor, the saint who was also a king. And if you were a royal personage, you got yourself buried as near as possible to the shrine, huddling up to this illustrious corpse. So we have Henry III, Edward I, Henry V, umpteen royal personages, and here is Richard II.
He was canonised and became known as Saint Edward. That's quite something, having a king made a saint, isn't it? I don't think very many have qualified in the past, have they?
From the shrine one can see Poet's Corner, where on a pillar is Blake's bust. His first job had been with a printmaker, and he'd been sent as a boy to the Abbey to draw the tombs. It left him with a lifelong obsession with the recumbent figure. So when in later life he draws God or the Ancient of Days as a flowing figure with hanging down hair, he's thinking of this effigy of Edward III, which he first drew as a boy. Edward III's body is in the tomb below his effigy, likewise Richard II and Henry III. But one king isn't where he should be, and that's the founder of the Stuart dynasty, James I. This is the Lady Chapel, and he ought to be here. Beside the body of his wife, Anne of Denmark, whose tombstone is somewhere under the organ. She was 6'7" and he was somewhat shorter, so they must have made rather an odd couple. When the Dean Stanley, broke into the vault, he found the huge coffin of Anne of Denmark, but no sign of James I. He then embarked on a search through the vaults under the floor of the chapel, and in the process made some touching and quite macabre discoveries. The search took him first down into the Stuart family vault, which is below this side chapel. Here, not unexpectedly, were the coffins of Mary Queen of Scots, Charles II, William and Mary, and Queen Anne, but no James I. What he didn't expect was at the foot of the steps leading down into the vault, which are here, was a great tumbled heap of much smaller coffins, some of them no larger than a cigar box. These were the 10 babies of Charles II and his brother James, and the 18 babies, many of them stillborn, of Queen Anne. Some of them anonymous, even unchristened. Only one had survived into proper childhood, and this was William, Duke of Gloucester, who died aged 11 in 1700 of a fever occasioned by excessive dancing on his birthday. It was the practice then to wrap bodies in lead before putting them in the coffin, and since many of the coffins had perished or fallen away, this pathetic heap of infants, which represented the wreck of the Stuart dynasty, must just have looked like a little pile of grey jelly babies. Not all royal infants went to the grave so unlamented. This is the tomb of Princess Sophie, the daughter of James I. A rather elderly baby, she died only 3 days old. This is her sister, Princess Mary, who died the following year, aged 2. She just learnt to talk, and as she was dying she said, I go, at last I go." And still in Children's Corner, in this urn are some bones found in the Tower of London in 1674 and buried here by Charles II, thinking or hoping perhaps that they were the bones of the princes in the Tower, perhaps murdered by Richard III. The urn was designed by Christopher Wren.
This is known as Our Lady Chapel. It's dedicated to Henry VII, who caused it to be built. The Queen has a stall in that left-hand corner, and again she shares that with the Dean, but of course only one at a time. Normally the Queen's standard, the personal standard.
Having searched everywhere else for James I, Dean Stanley was left with only one possibility. The Lady Chapel was built to house the tomb of Henry VII and his Queen, and to glorify the Tudor dynasty of which he was the founder. And Dean Stanley obviously thought that James I would not want or dare to disturb the body of Henry VII. And so the vault beneath this tomb was the last place he thought to look. But there, of course, was the body of James I, snuggling up to Henry VII. And Henry VII and his Queen had to budge up to make room for the intruder, except that James I did not think he was an intruder. He was the founder of the Stuart dynasty, so in his view he belonged next to the founder of the Tudors. It's the best example in the Abbey of the absurd lengths to which whom would you like to be seen dead with can lead.
Lion, her crown, and mantle. It has now been given over to the most honourable Order of Bath, the third oldest order of chivalry here in our country.
Oh, and here's poor Fred, the father of George III. He was Prince of Wales but died before he came to the throne. A totally insignificant man, he was buried without organ or anthem and scarcely any ceremony at all. Here lies Fred, who was alive and is dead, and there's no more to be said. And there's Butcher Cumberland, the brother of George II and the victor of Culloden, who many Scots would think not worthy of Christian burial at all.
I never did anything, he just confessed to everything. Now, Edward the Confessor had promised the Pope he would go on a pilgrimage to Rome, but internal conflicts prevented this, so he decided to build a church instead and dedicated it to St. Peter in 1042. Not this one. The one he built had round archways, heavy round pillars, and a much lower ceiling, but it was still a magnificent-looking church.
And here is Dean Stanley, who, aside from finding James I, did so much to establish the Abbey as the pantheon of the kingdom, opening its doors and indeed its floors to the nation's most illustrious corpses. His grave occupies a prime site adjacent to the King's and Queen's, but then if you're Dean of Westminster, I suppose one of the perks of the job is a well-situated grave. It's the sepulchral equivalent of what we in the theatre would call house seats.
The second thing is that underneath the chair is the stone of Scone. The Scots do actually regard the coronation stone, the stone of Scone, as their rightful property. And they say that Edward I, the King of England in the early 1300s, stole the stone of Scone and brought it back here to Westminster Abbey because it was a symbol of Scotland. And he believed that every king who was crowned on that chair there afterwards would not only be King or Queen of England, but King or Queen of Scotland as well, when England and Scotland were separate nations. Now, in 1951, an attempt was actually made to steal the stone of Scone. And two students from Glasgow University came to the Abbey. It is said they disguised themselves as Abbey maintenance men, so that no one would give them a second glance. They nearly got away with it.
Just about to start our history of the Abbey. 1,000 years of kings and queens. A multi-picture show. Part of the Queen's coronation. Beautiful music from the Abbey choir. Takes 20 minutes. Costs £1. In French, German, Spanish, and of course it's in English. The music's worth £1. 1,000 years of kings and queens. A multi-picture show. Part of our Queen's coronation. Beautiful music from the Abbey choir. Takes 20 minutes. Costs £1. In French, German, Spanish, and of course it's in English. The music's worth £1. Just about to start the history of the Abbey. 1,000 years of kings and queens. A multi-picture show.
Where do we go in here?
No, this is the history of the Abbey, madam. It's a motion picture put together with special effects. Tells the story of 1,000 years. You want to go to, if you want to go to the actual Abbey itself, you go up. Or do you want to see the picture show? Yes, you come in, madam. The church is open till 5 o'clock, and then it shuts. And then it's open 4 to 5, and then 5 to 6 is evening song. Yes, you have time to see the show and then round the clock. 1 minute to go before we start the show. 1,000 years of kings and queens. A multi-picture show. Part of the Queen's coronation. Beautiful music from the Abbey choir. Takes 20 minutes. Costs £1. French, German, Spanish, and of course it's in English. The music's worth £1.
Admire this great Christian church and to learn what they can of its history and its role in the life of the United Kingdom. They are following in the footsteps of countless millions who over long centuries have come to worship and as pilgrims or to marvel at the splendid tombs and memorials of great figures from the past, or simply to contemplate the awesome structure and subtle beauty of this national shrine.
This is called Statesman's Isle. It's not very neat altogether, the Abbey and where people actually commemorated. Sometimes we get quite a neat grouping, and other times they're a bit mixed up because there are a lot more statesmen down in the nave. Some of the more recent prime ministers are actually commemorated in the nave. But I like these because, of course, one of the things I have to do is to go across the road each day and to take the prayers at the beginning of the House of Commons. That's one of my...
Chaplain to the Speaker?
Chaplain to the Speaker, yes. So I go and do that every day. So I take some inspiration, as it were, from these great politicians of the past. I feel their shades follow me as I go across the road and do. Because, of course, the prayers which I take are exactly the same prayers as in the days of both Robert Peel and W.E. Gladstone. So nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. No. And one of the canons of Westminster has done this for quite a number of years. It isn't bound to be one of the canons of Westminster, but obviously it's nice and convenient to have one of the canons as being the chaplain because you only just throw it.
So how many canons are there then?
Canons, 4 of us. Four canons and a dean. So the chapter which runs the place, called a board of directors, if you like, it consists of these 5 clergymen.
And have you all got specific duties?
We've all got specific jobs, each one does. One is the canon treasurer, one is the canon steward, one is the canon theologian. And my job is to run St Margaret's, which is the church next door. So I do that as well. Yes. But of course, we're all part and parcel of the one thing.
I like Parliament having a church and the Speaker a chaplain, particularly one like Canon Gray, as downright as any 17th century divine. He and Speaker Boothroyd very well suited. I'm all for the church as by law established. Don't spit on your luck is my feeling. It's the same in a way with the sculpture. The standard of the Victorian sculpture in particular is not high. Disraeli and Gladstone, for instance, not much better than the average Victorian alderman who graces any northern municipal park. And taken as a whole, the north transept does look a bit like Madame Tussauds in marble. And some of the statues look like those Staffordshire figures that graced every mantelpiece in Victorian England. Others just look like shards of wedding cake. And there were people, even in the 19th century, who wanted the whole thing swept out so that one could see the architecture. But not, I think, now. Nothing fits, but the whole thing works. And the statues have taken their place along with the other relics.
Just get through that. All the way through? If you bring some engineering books up from the yard.
High up on the wall of the north transept, in the alley below the rose window, George Burrows, the clerk of works, and his men are battling with damp.
With honeycomb, we can run Mike's MICC cable from one side of the north transept to the other.
Private this staircase is, but say the word television and all doors are open to you. It's the best perk of the job.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Right, I'll see you later.
Right, let's chuck this one back.
Do you want to...
You got it, George?
Oh, loads of bloody time.
High above the Abbey floor, and unsuspected by most visitors, is a passage as wide as a country road that winds all round the building. The purpose of the triforium has never been clear. One obvious suggestion is that since the Abbey was always a stage for coronations and other royal ceremonies, so the triforium was a kind of upper circle for spectators. But this can't be true, because unless you stand at the very edge of the arch, you get no view of the Abbey floor. What seems most likely is that Henry III intended the ground floor of the Abbey to be a church, and the upper story, the triforium, to house yet more chapels. But since he never finished the lower church, he didn't even start on the second story, and when he died, its purpose was forgotten. So it remains, as we see it today, empty and unused. Walking round the triforium, one has the sense that here are the attics of the abbey, just waiting to be rummaged through, that there are lost treasures here, bits of history to be turned up. And so there are. Down in the nave there's a monument to a Major Andre, an English officer in the American War of Independence, who was sent on a secret mission behind enemy lines and was captured by the colonists and reluctantly executed. George III, who felt more strongly than the politicians did about the loss of the colonists as part of his patrimony, much in the same way as the Queen feels about the Commonwealth, had Major Andre's body brought back and a monument erected to him. And this is the box in which the body came. Oh, and over here are some of the railings so disastrously removed by Sir Francis Chantrey from the tombs in 1820. This is a replica of one of the 13th century angels in the south transept, probably made for the 1851 Great Exhibition. Also in the triforium, and not unlike the box in which Major Andre's remains came back, are the commentary boxes of BBC and ITN.
Can you foot the ladder, Ken? You've solved the damp. There's no more damp in the timber. Can you bring your light a bit further?
Yeah.
The trouble is, can you see in the corner?
Yeah.
You've solved the lead, but we're losing this end of the joist completely. Mind you, there's still a lot of evidence of death watch. If we take some scrapings, there's been some flight hole movement. If we take some scrapings, we'll send them up to Leslie.
Yeah.
And we'll ask him to diagnose it.
Leslie, a name that strikes terror into a woodworm's heart.
Now that's getting worse, Ken. We've lost the end of the timber joist completely, or the rafter there.
Gotcha.
What we need to do now is either fill it with epoxy resin, but I don't honestly believe there's enough timber left there to do it, or build a stone corbel out and support the end of joist. Now if that fails, we look at taking the lead off the top by the try, supporting both sides of the end of these joists, and crane out the main rafter through poets.
The whole bloom.
That's right, mind you, it's a hell of a job. But there's nothing, not even splicing two pieces either side with fish plates, and we're going to keep the end of this up. It's a main roof rafter. But you're looking, by the time you get a crane into poets, a good 10 grand. I don't think we've got it for next year.
A couple of years ago.
Give us a deal and chat to think about, won't it?
The restoration will be complete, of course, in October, and we shall have the big service. One of the things that will not have been done is the restoration of statues on the West Front. And we decided a little while ago in chapter that these should take the form of martyrs. Anthony, I wonder if you could bring us up to date as to what's happening.
Well, some time ago we made a decision about who those martyrs should be and the ones that we thought should be selected. And as you know, we've tried to get right round the world with 2 from the American continent, Martin Luther King and Oscar Romero, 3 from Europe, 2 from Africa, 1 from New Guinea, 1 from Afghanistan, and 1 from China. So we have that sort of spread. I think the problem is going to be, if anything, an aesthetic one of how you place those 10 figures in a row in Gothic niches, all appropriately dressed. Luckily, none of them need have trousers, but there are other aesthetic problems which may be raised. But that's where we've got to at the moment.
Can Canon Harvey remind us how many of them are women? Because obviously there are some of them that are
Yes.
females and...
Yes, 2 women and Manchu Masemola, who is quite a young girl in South Africa. And very fortunately, there's been some oral tradition, and we have got a sketch of what she looked like, even though there were no photographs or anything of the kind.
Of course, it's not only the modern martyrs, is it? Because just to remind Chapter that we have said that we will give the 4 statues either side of the door in the west front of justice, faith and truth and mercy, which as Canon Treasurer I should just tell you we don't actually have the money, but I'm sure we should do it. How will that fit in now?
I suppose it's always been like this. Do the work and find the money afterwards. That was how Henry III built the Abbey in the first place. Though he didn't have to worry whether the saints wore trousers, or that each gender was getting its proper shout.
Operation, but being done in the same workshop.
The exciting thing is that all this new sculpture has been done by the artist craftsmen who were attached to the firm, the big firm that's looked after the restoration from the start. And they are doing, and have been doing, the most wonderful work with all the beasts on the outside of Henry VII's chapel. Over 200 beasts will have been carved. And they've done this with great wit and style and imagination. And they're also doing all the West Front sculptures as well. So it's an enormous commission for them, and a very exciting and an unusual one.
The current restoration of Henry VII's chapel is nearly finished. And when this scaffolding comes down, it will be the end of a programme that began in 1973.
Cost £1. French, German, Spanish, and of course it's in English. The music's worth £1.
What do you want us to look at today? Well, I want to go and have a look at the pinnacles briefly, but then to concentrate on the frieze.
The aptly named Donald Buttress is surveyor of the fabric, and Tim Crawley, the head carver of the Cambridge builders Ratty and Kett, whose only comparable job was restoring King's College Chapel. So much of the Abbey has been restored over the years that little of the original outer stonework remains. So while not a fake, it's now a facsimile, a reproduction of itself.
Because here we've got all the operations now nearing completion, haven't we? This is the medieval pont at the back that we've cut away, and you think that's deep enough in there, and the
plenty of meat
grouting,
on there.
plenty of meat, yes. Yeah.
Are you happy with the weight of the foliage carving?
I think so, yes, because from down below it'll appear a lot more undercut. There's a lot of shadow, and I think we've now got these cusps and so on much better.
Yeah.
The cusping and the crockets are
working
about right.
off that leaf made a big difference.
Yes, oh absolutely, yes. It's very satisfying. It's been worth all the trouble because we didn't quite get it right, did we? I mean, that's exactly what we need. That through view through there.
Oh, that decorative treatment of the mains.
Yes,
really
and this again,
as well,
the individual character of each carver comes out, doesn't it? The 6 or 7 of them, they all do it in a slightly different way, which is absolutely in the medieval tradition. We don't want uniformity under any circumstances, and I think that's an achievement.
Good. And another one. Now can we try one straight in at the top note? Ta to ta. Good. And now to ta. Excellent. And one higher than you need to go. Splendid. So may we just go to the last page now so we can actually practice with the sort of position we'll have at the service when they will be up in the gallery away from us, and so they can feel that they're in the distance. And here, let's give them the cue. 2 folds 1. 1, 2. 2 folds 1. Trying to keep it really still, singing through the note, even though it's quiet. 2, 3, good breath.
In the nave, they're rehearsing for Sunday's Battle of Britain service.
Went up with him to help him to meet vengeance on the sons of Israel. When he approached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas went out to meet him with a small company. But when they saw the army coming to meet them, they said to Judas, "How can we, few as we are, fight against so strong and great a multitude?"
If you want to, can be a bit more of a storyteller.
Oh, right.
It's a little bit flat on the page at the moment.
In the pulpit from which Cranmer preached at the coronation of Edward VI, a young man who might prefer to be gunning his tornado low over our peaceful countryside, particularly since Paul Ferguson, the precentor, is wanting to turn him into Laurence Olivier.
The role of the few. So the more you can make of that, the better. Could we go back to...
Oh, no.
And again, a strong army of ungodly men. That's the last sentence on page 7.
And again, a strong army of ungodly men went up with him to help him, to take vengeance on the sons of Israel.
The head verger's not happy either. He's missing an air vice-marshal.
Judas went out to meet him with a small company. But when they saw the army coming to meet them, they said to Judas, "How can we, few as we are, fight against so great and strong a multitude?"
Yeah, sound a bit more anxious about it. You know, oh, how can we, few as we are? How can we, few as we are?
Okay.
You are really scared, and it's got to sound that way. Can we go from when he approached?
When he approached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas went out to meet him with a small company.
Yeah, with a small company. A little bit of a pause before it. Make the most of it.
Okay.
Really milk it. Yeah?
When he approached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas went out to meet him with a small company.
How relaxed the forces seem nowadays. None of that shouting and stamping and blanco under the fingernails.
And we are faint, for we have eaten nothing today. Judas replied, "It is easy for many to be hemmed in by few. For in the sight of heaven, there is no difference between saving by many or by few."
That's good.
I used to hate taking up the collection. Where did you look when you were walking back was always the problem.
Thank you. See you on Sunday. Yes, it's all organised and the Beadle's got it and we've got that mast. All organised. Yes, great, well done.
All sorted, as they say in EastEnders. Fall out for a smoke, if there's a smoking area. James I was one of the earliest opponents of smoking, and indeed wrote a tract against it. And when Dean Stanley broke into Henry VII's vault and found James I's coffin, there beside it was a broken clay pipe. It must have been smoked by the workman who'd moved in the coffin. Death lays its icy hand on kings. Sceptre and crown must tumble down, and in the dust be equal made with the humble scythe and spade. Handel wanted to be buried in the Abbey, and indeed left money for his monument, which is one of the last works of the sculptor Roubiliac. He took immense trouble with the likeness, modelling the face from Handel's death mask, but the ear, which might be thought to be Handel's vital organ, was actually modelled on a friend of the sculptor's, a Miss Rich. The first Handel festival was held in the Abbey in 1784, and thereafter the Abbey was regularly converted into a concert hall for the purpose, until 1834, when the Duke of Newcastle complained that the low price of the tickets was attracting the wrong sort of concert goer, mill workers and the like.
My group, this way, please.
People, people, people. But that's nothing new. And it's better than it was. There were mobs in the 18th century and regular riots, particularly at fashionable funerals, which in those days took place at night. In the 19th century, the crowds were more decorous, and when the Abbey was packed to the doors, it was generally to hear one of the fashionable preachers of the time, like Canon Farrar. Disraeli, when he was Prime Minister in 1878, had a fancy to hear Canon Farrar and wandered down from Downing Street, but found the place so crowded that the only place he could get to listen was, and this is quite hard to credit, was to climb onto the pedestal of this monument to get above the heads of the crowd. It's actually just opposite the spot where a few years later his own monument was to be erected. So many people were expected at Dickens' funeral that he had to be buried virtually in secret. The grave dug in the evening hastily when the last visitor had left, the service first thing next morning before visitors started to arrive. Afterwards, the crowds came in their thousands, including Tennyson, who was something of a star attraction himself. And when people began to stand on chairs and on the tombs to get a glimpse of him, he had to take refuge in the sanctuary. But one never quite knew with Tennyson. Like so many famous people, he wasn't averse to the limelight, just liked to have it controlled. Oh, and there's Kipling. And Hardy, only not his heart, which is buried in Dorset. One of the choir boys has taken up the cello. Well, it's nice to have another string to your bow. The question that's always asked about kings and queens is, what are they really like? We can get some idea from these effigies, which, clothed in robes of state, used to be placed on the coffin at funerals and left standing by the tomb afterwards. This is Henry VII. But on a surprising number of occasions, either in the course of some ceremony or through accident or sheer curiosity, we've had a glimpse of the actual bodies of the monarchs who were buried here. This is the tomb of Edward I. So massive and plain that, touching it for the first time, I thought it was made of cast iron. But it's actually Purbeck marble, the same material as the pillars. But it's so heavy and solid, it's more like a safe than a tomb, though once upon a time it used to be opened regularly. Edward I was a great warrior. He was known as the Hammer of the Scots, but he failed to subdue Scotland. And when he died in 1307, he made his son promise, when he was on his deathbed, that if an English army ever moved against Scotland, his body would be carried at the head of it. And so, regularly over the next century, the tomb was opened, the king's body taken out, wrapped in freshly oiled linen, in case there was a campaign. But then in 1399, the king's dynasty ended. The promise was forgotten, the custom fell into disuse, until in 1778, out of sheer curiosity, the tomb was opened again. And there was the king, 6'2", perfectly preserved, wrapped in oiled linen, each arm, each leg, each hand, each finger, each toe separately wrapped. And over him, his royal robe. And after this carefully documented last glimpse, pitch was poured into the tomb, and it was sealed forever. She is not dead, but sleepeth, we say. But if you want somewhere to sleep, the Abbey's not really the best place. Take Catherine of Valois. She was the wife of Henry V, Shakespeare's Little Kate. And when Henry V died, she married again Owen Tudor, whose family, 2 generations later, inherited the throne. When she died, she was buried at the east end of the church, which happened to be the place that Henry VII selected for his Lady Chapel. So her coffin was dug up and put on one side and left. So here you have the daughter of Charles VI of France, the wife of Henry V, the mother of Henry VI, the grandmother of Henry VII, just lying there in a loose coffin. And she was still there 200 years later when Pepys came round the Abbey, tipped the verger, pulled aside the plank and took up the body, which was now like a bit of old leather, and gave her a kiss. And he went home and wrote in his diary, "And I reflected that this was my birthday, 36 years old, and I did first kiss a queen." And it wasn't until 200 years after that that she was really properly buried, when Dean Stanley was tidying up the Abbey, and he buried her in this altar in the chantry of her husband, Henry V. Except they're still not together. She's on the first floor and he's downstairs.
Now, will it tell where we are, or does it tell us where to go?
In addition to the unknown warrior buried in the Abbey, there are about 26 or so monarchs buried here. They don't bury people here anymore, however. The last monarch to be buried here was George II in 1760. Unfortunately,
and it's now
that is
disabled
in
and
the chapel of Henry
handicapped
VII.
from the wars who actually make these poppies. Once a year they have a remembrance day called Poppy Day, and ladies who haven't got too much else to do stand on street corners and sell the poppies, and the money goes to making more poppies and to helping the disabled, etc., etc.
Richard II is everywhere in the Abbey, though visitors will often pass by his picture, the earliest contemporary portrait of an English monarch, which hangs just inside the west door. He came to the throne as a boy in 1377, and as a king he was disastrous, ending up deposed and murdered. But he was one of the Abbey's greatest benefactors. And here above the south transept is his badge of the White Hart. After he was murdered by Henry IV, Richard was briefly buried in King's Langley, but in a fit of remorse, Henry V had the body brought here and buried near the shrine. Over the years, the tomb fell into disrepair, and Westminster schoolboys used to poke about in it with sticks, one of them even bringing out a rib. When it was opened to be repaired in 1871, they found the orb and the sceptre and fragments of these shoes, just as in the picture. Oh, and he invented the handkerchief. Some of the Abbey clergy and staff are lucky enough to live here in Little Cloister, which is also where the Abbey Sewing Circle, the Guild of St Faith's, meets in regular session.
Now that means that you can get 4 of these panels and a reasonable width of surrounding red panel. 4 panels of this, 5 panels of red.
So if you bring the chair shoe, that's right. Now, I think that one's about the nearest to that.
It is, but it's really not very far away.
Not far away.
From that anyway.
And you said you really want to sort of
I don't mind it having a bit of contrast.
colour.
Otherwise it looks like John Lewis's.
Lewis.
It may be because it's so often oversold by rhapsodical commentators on state occasions, but I find the exterior of the Abbey, and particularly the colour, not all that prepossessing. Unwashed, it was dowdy. Now, in the cold light of non-ceremonial day, cleaned and restored, its stark white isn't as appealing as the grey or honey-coloured tones of Wells, say, or York, or even St Paul's. But inside it's a different matter. This is the effigy of Philippa of Hainaut, the Queen of Edward III, who died in 1369. It's alabaster, and her hair is covered in an elaborate net with little pins to which gold beads or precious stones would once have been attached, or of course long since gone. She's very battered and unadorned, and of course that's what we think the Middle Ages were like, but they weren't. They weren't like that at all. Even in the 17th century, the Abbey would still have been glowing with gold and mosaic. These walls crisscrossed with colour, the windows vibrant with coloured glass, the tombs decorated, the altars inlaid. The whole place as much a jewel box as, say, St Mark's in Venice still is today. What we have now is a pale shadow of what it was once, a distressed, rubbed-down version of a much gaudier original. Of course, we tend to take this bleached, austere finish to correspond to what we would like to think our national character to be. We too, we tell ourselves, are plain and without frills. Cromwell and the Puritans, classy interior decorators. A 17th century Sire Maugham who came in and chucked out all the junk and stripped the place down into a distillation of our Englishness. I don't believe it. We're as vulgar and showy as everybody else. Besides, what we call time is very often a euphemism for theft. Anyone who thinks the English aren't showy and vulgar should look at the tomb of Lord Hunsdon, the cousin and chamberlain of Elizabeth I. The tallest monument in the Abbey, it's so vast it's a more than adequate habitation for the living, let alone a resting place for the dead. Still, it's very jolly, and there's something of the fairground organ about it. You half expect a figure to pop out and blow a trumpet, or tell you the weather.
OK, on your feet, let's go.
Unless they're royal or noble, women have a much harder time getting into the Abbey than men, except of course as wives. Though there are quite a few notable women buried and commemorated here, there are also some notable absentees. George Eliot, for instance, not commemorated till 1980, kept out by the supposed irregularities of her private life. Elizabeth Barrett, not here, not even as the wife of Robert Browning. And Florence Nightingale, perhaps fittingly with her military connections, is in St Paul's. And the Bronte sisters, daughters of a much humbler church than this, were only commemorated in 1947. But of course, once you start on this game of who's here and who's not, there's no end to it. And if women have some cause for complaint, painters have more. There are no painters here at all, perhaps because of their bohemian lives, perhaps as a legacy of the old monastic view that the ear was the organ of instruction, the eye of temptation. There's Blake in this rather startling bust by Epstein, but he's not here as a painter, but on literary grounds. This is Thackeray. Thackeray's daughter, Lady Ritchie, was a well-known eccentric, and she felt that the whiskers on this bust were too long They were done by an Italian sculptor, Marrachetti. So she had the Dean take the bust down into the basement and brought in another sculptor, Mr. Onslow Ford, and she stood by while he chipped away at the whiskers, and then when he'd done, she flicked over the barbered bust with a cloth and had it put back on its niche. There are few furtive monuments in the Abbey. If human beings were modest, it would be a much emptier place. Vanity is the great commanding passion of all, wrote Sheridan. It is this that produces the most grand and heroic deeds, or impels to the most dreadful crimes. Save me but from this passion, and I can defy the others. They are mere urchins, but this is a giant. It was Sheridan's vanity that made him think more of himself as a politician than a playwright. In his view, he belonged at the West End, together with his contemporaries, Pitt and Fox. Instead, he's landed up here in Poets' Corner, along with the riffraff like Dickens and Kipling and Shakespeare.
Talking Heads, Alan Bennett's acclaimed monologues. Watch all episodes on BBC iPlayer.